Alright, buckle up, because the story you're about to hear is one of the wildest rides in all of human history. We're talking about a guy who went from being a broke, barely speaking French kid on a tiny Mediterranean island to shaking the entire world to its core. Yeah, we're diving into the life of Napoleon Bonaparte. And trust me, this is not your average history class. This is the real deal. So, let's kick things off from the very beginning. It's August 15th, 1769. The island of Corsica, a rugged, sun-scorched place wedged between France and Italy, is barely a year into being French territory. The ink on the treaty that handed Corsica over to France is practically still wet. And right in the middle of all that political chaos, a baby boy is born into the Bonaparte family. His parents name him Napoleone di Bonaparte, a very Italian name, by the way. Not exactly the kind of name that screams, future Emperor of France, right? But hey, life has a funny way of surprising you. His father, Carlo Bonaparte, was a Corsican lawyer with big ambitions and a big family. 8 kids, if you can believe that. His mother, Letizia, was something else entirely. Tough as nails, sharp as a tack, and absolutely relentless. People around Corsica used to say that Letizia was the backbone of that entire household, and honestly, that tracks. She raised Napoleon with an iron hand, and you can bet that shaped him into the man he became. Now, Corsica at that time was not exactly a land of opportunity. It was poor, politically unstable, and full of proud, fierce people who didn't take kindly to being ruled by outsiders. The Bonapartes weren't rich, they were minor nobility, which sounds fancy but really just meant they had a coat of arms and a mountain of financial stress. Carlo was smart enough to play the French political game though, and that opened a door that would change everything. When Napoleon was just 9 years old, his father managed to secure a royal scholarship that sent the boy off to a military school in mainland France. Think about that for a second. 9 years old, barely speaking French, shipped off to a foreign country to live among strangers. Does that give you chills or what? Most kids at that age are worried about losing their favorite toy. And this kid is crossing the Mediterranean Sea to start a completely new life. He landed at a preparatory school in Autun, France, where he spent a few months trying to pick up the language. And let me tell you, it wasn't a smooth ride. Napoleon spoke French with a heavy Corsican Italian accent, and his classmates let him know about it. Constantly. They teased him about his name, his accent, his clothes. The other boys came from wealthy, established French families, and this little island kid stuck out like a sore thumb. But here's the thing about Napoleon, and this is something you're going to see again and again throughout his story. The guy simply did not quit. You could knock him down 10 times, and he'd get back up 11. He threw himself into his studies with a kind of obsession that most people reserve for things they actually enjoy. And what did Napoleon enjoy? Mathematics, history, geography, military strategy. While other kids were goofing around, this boy was devouring books about ancient commanders, battle tactics, and the rise and fall of empires. Old school hustle, right from the start. By 1784, Napoleon was 15. He was accepted into the École Militaire in Paris. This was the big league, the most prestigious military academy in all of France, a place where the sons of French nobility trained to become officers. And Napoleon? He was on scholarship, still the poor island kid, still the outsider. But he graduated in just 1 year, a program that usually took 2 or 3. His examiners noted his exceptional talent in mathematics and artillery. The boy had a gift, and he knew how to use it. He graduated as a second lieutenant in the French artillery. Not the cavalry, not the infantry, the artillery. And that choice tells you a lot about how Napoleon's mind worked. Artillery at the time was considered a bit of a technical, unglamorous branch of the military. It required serious mathematical skill and careful planning. It wasn't the flashy sword-waving stuff that the young noblemen were lining up for. But Napoleon saw something others didn't. He understood that artillery was the future of warfare. The ability to project devastating force from a distance, to break enemy formations before they even reached your lines. That was power. Real power. Now, before we go any further, what do you think drives a person like that? Is it hunger? Ambition? Or is there something deeper going on? Something that gets under your skin and just won't let go? Because honestly, when you look at Napoleon's early years, you see a kid who had everything working against him and still found a way to come out swinging. That's not luck, folks. That's something else entirely. Let's talk a little bit about the world Napoleon was stepping into. because you can't understand the man without understanding the times. France in the 1780s was a powder keg about to explode. The monarchy was drowning in debt. The common people were starving. The aristocracy was living large while everyone else suffered. And the ideas of the Enlightenment, liberty, equality, reason, were spreading like wildfire through coffeehouses, pamphlets, and whispered conversations in the streets of Paris. Something was coming. Everybody could feel it, like that eerie stillness right before a massive storm rolls in. Napoleon, as a young officer stationed in various French garrisons, was watching all of this unfold in real time. He was reading voraciously, philosophy, history, political theory. He was a huge admirer of Rousseau and the ideas of the social contract. He wrote essays, including one about Corsican independence, which tells you he still had one foot in his island identity. He was still figuring out who he was, a Corsican patriot? A French officer? Both? Neither. And then, in 1789, the whole world turned upside down. The French Revolution erupted with a force that nobody was truly prepared for. The Bastille fell on July 14th. The king lost his head, literally, a few years later. The old order was smashed to pieces, and in its place came something nobody had ever quite seen before. A republic born in fire, blood, and extraordinary ideals. This is not the time or place to get into all the chaos of the revolution. That's a whole series of its own. But what matters for our story is this. The revolution completely blew open the doors of opportunity for someone like Napoleon. See, in the old France, your rank and your career were determined by your birth. If you weren't from the right family, you simply could not rise above a certain level, no matter how talented you were. The revolution changed all that, at least in theory. Suddenly, merit mattered, talent mattered, results mattered. And Napoleon? He had talent to spare. Many of the old royalist officers fled France or were removed from their positions. The new revolutionary army desperately needed competent commanders. And Napoleon, disciplined, brilliant, burning with ambition, was right there, ready. His big break came in 1793 at a place called Toulon. And oh boy, if you don't know the story of Toulon, you are in for a treat. Toulon was a major French port city that had opened its gates to a British fleet, essentially handing over a key strategic position to France's most powerful enemy. The revolutionary government was furious and sent an army to take it back. But the siege was going nowhere. The attacking French forces were disorganized, their commanders were mediocre, and the British were dug in tight. The situation was, to put it mildly, a mess. Enter Napoleon Bonaparte, 24 years old, assigned to the siege as an artillery commander, initially in a supporting role. But he quickly assessed the situation and saw what everyone else had missed. There was a key hilltop position overlooking the harbor. If the French could take that position and plant their artillery there, they could dominate the entire port and force the British fleet to withdraw. Simple in theory, brutal in execution. Napoleon pushed his plan aggressively. He argued, he convinced, he badgered the commanders above him until they gave him the resources he needed. Then he led the assault himself, personally directing artillery fire, riding up and down the lines under enemy fire, inspiring his men with a kind of fearless energy that was almost magnetic. And it worked. The French took the position, the British fleet retreated. Toulon fell. Can you imagine? A 24-year-old kid, barely a few years out of military school, pulling off a strategic masterstroke that seasoned generals had failed to achieve. Does that blow your mind or what? Because it absolutely should. The revolutionary leadership took notice. Napoleon was promoted to brigadier general almost immediately, at 24, in the middle of a revolution that was chewing up and spitting out careers and people at an alarming rate. But it wasn't all smooth sailing, not by a long shot. The chaos of revolutionary France meant that political winds shifted constantly, and survival depended on backing the right factions at the right moment. Napoleon had been associated with Robespierre's brother, and when Robespierre fell in the Thermidorian reaction of 1794, Napoleon briefly found himself under suspicion and even under house arrest. For a terrifying moment, it looked like his meteoric rise might end before it had truly begun. But he wriggled out of it, as he always seemed to do. The charges didn't stick, and he was soon back in the game. The next major chapter came in 1795, in Paris itself. There was an attempted royalist uprising, people trying to bring back the old monarchy, and the revolutionary government was in danger. A commander named Barras called on Napoleon to help suppress the revolt. And Napoleon, never one to miss an opportunity, used artillery, yes, artillery again, to disperse the royalist crowds in the streets of Paris. The famous whiff of grape shot, as it became known. It was a brutal but effective solution, and it cemented Napoleon's reputation as the man who could get things done. As a reward, he was given command of the Army of Italy. Now this sounds like a great gig, and ultimately it was. But at the time, the Army of Italy was basically the French military's problem child. Underfunded, undersupplied, poorly equipped, with morale in the gutter. Soldiers going weeks without proper food or pay. If you handed someone that command today, they might say, "Thanks, but no thanks." Napoleon said yes before they finished the sentence. You know what he told his troops when he first addressed them? He basically said, "I know you have nothing. I know you're tired and hungry and beaten down. But I'm going to lead you into the most fertile plains in the world, and everything you need, you're going to take." This man understood something fundamental about human motivation. People don't follow a leader because of a fancy title. They follow someone who makes them believe that tomorrow is going to be better than today. That's a gift, and Napoleon had it in spades. And here's something that people don't always talk about, but it's worth pausing on. Napoleon's personal charisma was something extraordinary. He had this ability to look a soldier in the eye, remember his name, ask about his family, and make that man feel like the most important person in the room. In an army of tens of thousands, soldiers would come home and tell their families that the general himself had spoken to them, that he knew who they were. That kind of connection between a commander and his troops is incredibly rare, and it's one of the secret ingredients of Napoleon's military success. So here we are, late 1795, early 1796. Napoleon Bonaparte on the verge of launching one of the most spectacular military campaigns in history. A young man shaped by poverty and exile, by humiliation and perseverance, by revolution and opportunity. A man who read everything, thought deeply about everything, and was absolutely, relentlessly determined to leave his mark on the world. And if you think the story up to this point has been wild, friends, you haven't seen anything yet. The Italian campaign is coming, and that's where everything changes. That's where Napoleon Bonaparte stops being a rising star and becomes a legend. But before we get there, we need to talk about one more thing from his formative years. Something that people sometimes gloss over, but that actually tells you so much about who Napoleon really was at his core. And that's his intellectual life. Napoleon was a reader in an era when most military men were not. He carried books with him on every campaign: history, mathematics, geography, classical literature. He was obsessed with ancient commanders: Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Hannibal. He didn't just read about their battles for entertainment. He analyzed them. He dissected their decisions, their mistakes, their moments of genius. He was essentially creating a mental library of tactical and strategic knowledge that he could draw on in any situation. He also wrote a lot. Poetry, political pamphlets, personal letters of extraordinary emotional depth. His love letters to Josephine, his future wife, who we'll get to in later episodes, are famous for their almost unhinged passion. The man who cold-bloodedly calculated the trajectory of an artillery shell was also capable of writing lines that would make your heart ache. Go figure. There's a saying in French, les extrêmes se touchent, opposites meet. Napoleon was living proof. He was also, despite his reputation, surprisingly insecure in certain ways. He was acutely conscious of his height, which, by the way, has been wildly exaggerated by history. He was about 5'6" or 5'7", which was completely average for a man of his time. The Napoleon was tiny thing was largely British propaganda, fake news, 18th century style, but he was still sensitive about it, and about his accent, and about being seen as an outsider. That chip on his shoulder was enormous, and it was fuel. Because here's the thing about people who feel like outsiders. Sometimes they spend their whole lives trying to prove something, trying to show the world that they belong, that they matter, that they're not just that weird kid with the funny accent from that little island nobody had heard of. And sometimes, just sometimes, that drive produces something extraordinary. Napoleon Bonaparte was not born great. He was not handed greatness. He grabbed it with both hands through sheer force of will, intelligence, and an almost terrifying ambition. And the world he was about to reshape had absolutely no idea what was coming. Episode 1 is just the beginning, folks. The stage is set. The pieces are in place. A young general with an underfunded army is about to march into Italy, and what happens next will leave your jaw on the floor. Stay with us, because this story It's just getting started. And trust me, you're going to want to be here for every single moment of it.